Live when Dennis Mulhaupt calls the meeting to order.
Okay, we'd like to gather up everyone, please. Okay, good. Thank you very much. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'm Dennis Mulhaupt. In March, the board designated me to serve as alternate presiding governor on an interim basis to preside over the board in its meetings in the absence of the presiding governor. But today we do have the presence of the presiding governor. He just has to leave a little bit early, so I've been asked to chair this meeting. He's asked me to chair the meeting, and I've agreed to do that. So, but for the record, Michael Linton, the presiding governor, is present. This is an open meeting of the Broadcasting Board of Governors held in compliance with the Government and the Sunshine Act. The live broadcast will also be available on the BBG website, www.bbg.gov. Governor Perino cannot be here today. The presence of 5 or more governors satisfied the board's quorum requirement. The board may conduct business based on a majority vote, a quorum being present. The board has a very full agenda, but there is nothing more important than the threats to lives of our journalists. Al-Hurra correspondent Junete Unal and Bashir Fahmy have been missing since they entered Syria to report from Aleppo on August 20th. There are reports that they were taken by Syrian forces. We have called on Syrian authorities to answer questions about their whereabouts, and we raised the topic in our meeting with the Secretary of State earlier today. I would like to ask MBN President Brian Conniff to update us briefly on their situation. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you mentioned, we never want to lose sight of the difficult and dangerous work all of our correspondents undertake on a daily basis. As you just stated, Al-Hurra's correspondent, Bashir Fahmy, and his freelance cameraman have been missing since August the 20th while reporting from Aleppo, Syria. Since that time, we have heard nothing of his whereabouts, Bashir Fahmy's, despite numerous attempts to get answers from the Syrian government. The cameraman, the freelance cameraman, has been on Syrian TV appearing dazed and bruised. The Syrian government persists in saying they know nothing of the journalist's whereabouts. We've continued to use the offices of media and human rights organizations to press the Syrian authorities for answers, as well as other intermediaries in the region. I'd like to show a quick video that highlights the case of these two individuals, but also illustrates the dangerous environment that all of our correspondents and all media are undertaking and experiencing in Syria right now. Please roll the video.
Every day, journalists from around the globe risk their lives to report from conflict zones, and Syria is the latest example. Freedom of the press is paramount to getting accurate news and information to those who need it the most. The brave journalists that enter Syria regularly face physical harm, detention, and death to report the facts to their audiences around the world. According to Reporters Without Borders, since the uprising started in March 2011, 9 journalists have been killed, including Marie Colvin and Remy Ochlik. Additionally, at least 30 citizen journalists and bloggers have also been killed. Journalists from Voice of America and Al-Hurra television have risked their lives reporting from inside the Syrian border, and the dangers have struck close to home. On August 20th, 2012, Al-Hurra correspondent Bashar Fahmy and his cameraman Junat Unal were with the Japan News journalist Mika Yamamoto in Aleppo when a firefight erupted and the journalists were caught in the crossfire. Mika Yamamoto lost her life, and Bashar and Junat were abducted. MBN and the BBG call for the release of Bashar and Junat and all journalists held against their will.
Thank you, Brian. On behalf of the board, I want to reiterate our call for Syrian officials to release any information they have on the capture and whereabouts of these brave journalists. The board also notes a number of other threats to our journalists since our last meeting, including in Tibet, BBG-sponsored reporters have faced harassment and excessive interrogation while traveling to visit family in the Tibet Autonomous Region. In Mali, Malik Alayu Maiga, a local radio reporter who contributes stories to VOA, has been badly beaten by Islamists occupying the north of the country after reporting on the Islamists' failed plan to amputate a thief's hand. In Angola, VOA correspondent and human rights lawyer Jose Manuel Gimbi had reporting equipment stolen from his home. In Azerbaijan, Nuhasha Fatanela was attacked while covering a story at a steel factory in Baku. Turkan Karimov, another RFE-RL reporter who arrived soon after to cover the incident, was also roughed up. In Nigeria last week, Boko Haram, a radical Nigerian sect, again threatened reporters working with Voice of America. In a statement, Boko Haram expressed that the group was going to target VOA and, quote, will not leave any correspondent or staff of VOA alone, unquote. The board condemns the ill treatment of these individuals. In each instance, we have worked closely with NGOs and other government partners to advocate for the safety of our reporters in the field. On behalf of the board, I urge officials and local authorities to ensure the safety of all journalists operating in these locations and punish those who threaten or harm reporters or their families. On behalf of the board, I'd also like to express sincere condolences to our board colleague, Undersecretary of State Tara Sonnenschein, for the passing of 4 diplomats in Libya, including the new U.S. Ambassador Christopher Stevens, who visited this very building before heading out to his post. We are deeply saddened by the loss of these 4 brave Americans and extend our deepest sympathies to their loved ones. We condemn this cowardly act of violence in the strongest possible terms and reaffirm our commitment to a robust presence in Libya at this critical time, including that of BBG personnel who are covering the events there. The board held its last formal meeting on June 7, 2012 at the headquarters of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty in Prague in the Czech Republic. The meetings of the June 2012 meeting are found behind tab 2 in the briefing book. Do any governors have comments or questions about the minutes? Do any?
First, Mr. Chairman, let me, I'm not sure what to call you. Mr. Linton is the presiding chairman. You're the Mr. Alternative.
Just filling in.
Well, you're better than a spare tire. But let me, first of all, say, even though you referred to the loss of life of Ambassador Stevens and others as their passing, I would refer to it as their murder. That's all it was murder. And we ought to just call a spade and label it for what it is. And it's a terrible tragedy. It's the first ambassador we've lost now in 43 years, although we ought to be concerned about all diplomats that we've lost, whether they be chief of mission or a custodian at the embassy. And we have lost others who have died in the course of duty. And I simply want to echo what you have said, but I'd like to strengthen the language and hope that our viewing audience realizes that we condemn violence and we condemn murder or assassination, and that's basically what this was. And there is no justification, no matter what video may have been put out. And I'm one who believes in respect for all faiths, all religions. You should not denigrate someone else's religion. But when it happens, that is not a justification for violence or for murder. And that's what happened in this case. And I applaud the Secretary of State and others for the strong action words that they've used. And I hope that the American government is successful in bringing the perpetrators of this act to justice.
Thank you. I think we all share those emotions and those feelings. To the minutes, do any governors have comments or questions about the minutes?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to change my vote in favor of non-disclosure to a no. It does not change the outcome of the vote, but it lets me be registered as opposing it. And I would ask for the courtesy to be extended to do that.
Is there objection? Okay, without objection then. Is there a motion to...
That's adopted.
Yes.
All right.
Is there a motion to approve the minutes with that
All right. The motion, I assume, is a motion to approve the minutes as amended.
as amended?
All right, let me just say for the record, the reason I'm going to abstain is normally I'm able to read these and review them all, and frankly, due to the volume of information that came in this time, I was overwhelmed. Plus, I was in Canada for one day and didn't get back until a day later. So I'm going to abstain simply because I haven't personally gone over it, and as you know, I normally do go over these, and then I let Juan know about it 2 or 3 days in advance of any clarification I had, but my own fault. I just wasn't able to get to it, and I confess error. So I'm not opposing it, but I don't feel comfortable voting for it, particularly since I took up at least 40 minutes of the last meeting dealing with the non-disclosure issue, and I haven't fully reviewed what's in it. So therefore, I'm going to abstain.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes as amended. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? The minutes are approved.
And you will reflect that I abstained. You didn't call for abstentions.
We will reflect that you've abstained. The Governance Committee met this morning to deal with a number of important issues, and I will put my other hat on and make the report for the Governance Committee. As I said, the committee met this morning and had a robust discussion about a number of topics related to the restructuring of United States international broadcasting. The consensus among the committee members is that the board should proceed to appoint a chief executive officer of United States International Broadcasting as a matter of urgency. Since its inauguration in 2010, the board has discussed the need to create a CEO and has initiated several efforts to create the position through legislative means. Today, however, the committee is recommending to the plenary board that a CEO position be created under the existing statutory framework provided by the International Broadcasting Act, noting that such a position may have certain limitations. I note that the following recommendations do not reflect the views of Governor Ashe, but do reflect the views of other committee members, Governors Linton, McHugh, and myself. I would also note that the board met with the Secretary of State today, and she communicated her own personal strong support for the creation of a CEO of U.S. International Broadcasting. Specifically, the committee recommends as follows: that the board note that both the BBG strategic plan adopted by the board in October 2011 and the board's January 2012 decision call for the creation of the position of Chief Executive Officer of United States International Broadcasting. That the board note the efforts of the IBB director to develop draft legislation entitled the International Broadcasting Innovation Act with the characteristics required by the board's January 2012 decision, including the creation of a CEO. That, notwithstanding efforts to pursue the International Broadcasting Innovation Act legislation, the plenary board should now act to create a CEO of United States International Broadcasting within the board's existing statutory authority under the United States International Broadcasting Act of 1994 as amended. The intent of this effort is to empower the CEO to the greatest extent permitted under existing law to act as the day-to-day executive of BBG-sponsored U.S. international broadcasting, including both its federal and non-federal components. That the board authorizes the presiding governor to form a nominating committee composed of three governors to recommend a method of selecting, appointing, remunerating, and evaluating the CEO in accordance with federal law and regulation. The committee will not start unless and until its work, unless and until congressional concurrence is received. I've just added that because that was clearly the matter that we discussed today. Is that?
Where should I write what you just said in?
Well, at the end of the sentence.
Which is the third paragraph, third bullet?
The bullet that starts, the board authorizes the providing governor to form a nominating committee.
Right, and then that's the
I
fourth
said,
bullet.
then I said, at the end, we are adding a line that the committee will not start its work unless and until congressional concurrence is received. This will be reflected in the minutes.
Well, it will not start its work until what?
Yeah. That's not right.
I thought it was what we talked about, that we would not, that we would not form the nominating committee until okay. Until congressional notification.
So how's it going to read?
Okay, until congressional notification. We'll change it to congressional notification.
Reprogramming.
Right, until it is sent.
Well, that's a significant difference. When it's sent, of course, is prior to approval.
That's right.
So you're going to start the process before the congressional committees approve it.
They can still oppose, but we'll start the process.
And if they oppose, does the process stop?
They can stop it if they want to stop it.
Well, but we had this discussion earlier in our closed meeting of that the board does have, according to some legal authorities, that once you notice Congress, you can still move forward. Now, you do it at your peril.
Correct.
That's
And I would say
and
considerable
that's
peril.
more accurately reflecting what we decided. That's right.
Well, why are we not waiting until you're only talking about 15 days. Doesn't Congress turn it around, the committees, appropriations?
How long will it take, Mary Jane?
How long does it take them to do it?
Anywhere from 15 days to a couple of months. It depends. Sometimes we get it right away, and sometimes they have lots of questions, and sometimes
But
the
you
process
said
can
it
take
could go
a
several
couple
months.
months. It could.
In theory.
It could.
Here's my concern. Let's say you get it due to the elections and the change perhaps in the makeup of the House or the Senate and new committees. Obviously, there's going to be a new ranking member on Senate Foreign Relations, Senator Corker. And there'll be, I think due to term limits, there's a new chair in the House Foreign Affairs Committee, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, but I think I'm right.
That's correct, sir.
Assuming the Republicans maintain control of the House. But if they don't maintain control, you obviously have a new chairman because she gets replaced. And so if this process goes several months in terms of the notification, but we proceed on the nominating committee to go hire the CEO, and let's say we come across Mr. or Mrs. Ideal, and we hire them, but the response to the notification hadn't come back, and then they come back, and one of them says no, does that person just lose their job?
No, I can only speak for myself, but I think we have to make our case to Congress. My point is that we shouldn't wait for that to happen to begin the process. If we find the ideal candidate, I think that we should present that candidate to Congress and make our case for him or her.
Well, I would raise the question, how many serious candidates are going to really apply and put themselves out for it until they know Congress has signed off on it?
Well, I
Are we
think
putting the cart before the horse?
the way the version that I was handed reads that the board authorizes the presiding governor, in this instance Governor Litton, to form a nominating committee composed of 3 governors to recommend a method to
That's
select,
right.
appoint, remunerate, and evaluate a method.
Correct.
So I think
it's not an appointment.
that we could do that, and you appoint them, and then they meet and they process, and they come and say, we're going to do it this way.
Yeah,
Then there's
that's
a
right.
thousand ways to have that not go forward, but at least we should start that. We should start this process because
Well,
those
this
things
may
take
be-
months.
You may have shed some light on this. So are you telling me you're doing all the preliminary work, or if you said if you're going to have surgery, do all the prep work, but the actual hiring, that's not in here?
Right.
That's right.
So-
That's a
so-
further
so-
further
so-
decision of the board.
All right, then I think we ought to clarify this, and that's why this discussion is helpful.
That's a good point.
That we're going to do all the prep work that you have to do to hire a CEO and hire the right person, but the actual advertisement for it, or whatever you do to go get Mr. X or Mrs. X, won't start, or at least here, it doesn't say it's going to start. In other words, do what you got to do to get it all together, but you're not actually interviewing people and saying, we think Tara here is the ideal new CEO, and won't you take the job?
I think the appointment of a CEO is a further board decision. So
It's a what?
a further board decision.
Well, I just think by what's written here is you clearly are not saying that, so therefore I presume you're not doing it. And you would come back to the
Saying
board.
what?
It's pretty clear. A method of selecting, appointing, remunerating, evaluating.
That's the method.
Correct.
The
That's
actual
That's what's in the
hiring won't
resolution.
occur.
That's what we're saying, I think.
It's what's written.
I'm not arguing with you. I'm actually agreeing. If you concur with what I said, is the hiring wouldn't start till later.
Sure.
Yeah, that's right. It's subject to further board action.
All right,
The
so
hiring.
they would recommend all these procedures, and hopefully come up with the right way of doing it. And then they'd come back and the board would have to vote on it. And then once the board, assuming it was a favorable vote, then they could start the process of advertising, hiring, interviewing.
Yeah, that's right. Okay.
It seems to me through having this discussion, it's like a legislative history. We are setting out for the record, because this is being recorded or on tape, what we intend.
Okay, Paul.
If the intent is something different, then of course we need to know that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could just suggest that thought, you would put in the last paragraph of the decision element, just a sentence that says, so that would read, the governance committee will consider the IBB director's plan, et cetera, and the recommendations of the nominating committee, and then at the end, the actual appointment of a CEO will be the subject of a further board decision.
So that would be at the end of the last bullet point.
No, that's
I haven't
fine.
gotten to that part yet.
Well
Fine.
done, Victor. That was well done. That was.
So, moving on, that the board instruct the IBB director under the guidance of the governance committee to develop a plan to address the following issues: the authorities that should be delegated from the board to the CEO, the agency officers who should report directly to the CEO, the relationship of the CEO and the IBB director, the relationship between the CEO and the grantees, including how the relationship be formalized and expressed in the grant agreements, a proposed budget and timeline for implementation of a CEO. That the IBB director is authorized and encouraged to work in close cooperation with BBG-sponsored broadcasters, including the grantees, in preparing the requested plan. The board directs and encourages all elements of USIB to cooperate fully with the IBB director in facilitating the timely and accurate completion of the requested plan and budget. That the board directs the IBB director, as soon as practicable, to prepare and deliver any congressional reprogramming notification that may be required to implement the board's intentions as stated in this decision. The governance committee will consider the IBB director's plan and any recommendations from the nominating committee at the next meeting of the governance committee. And then could you just tell me your wording again? I think that accurately reflected what we decided.
The actual appointment of a CEO will be the subject of a further board decision.
Right. Any discussion of this matter?
Yes, I have two things I want to make sure that we cover. One is I've heard from members of the majority and the minority in both chambers that they would like to have a more thorough understanding of this. So is there a sentence we could add that would require the IBB director to have these conversations so they're more thorough, or team, or some,
I think
the IBB
governor
director
should do
leads a
that.
team to go, because the one-off conversations may work, but we're not hearing that they're working well. So I think
I like that,
we should
Michael.
insert that it's
That's
very
helpful.
thorough, because more information is better. And then I read a lot of information in the last few days. I just want to be sure that there are 18 authorities that are established for the board, 10 that we can delegate, and 8 we can't delegate. Is that an accurate number? Or am I mixing my board memos here? But that's what's on the table here, is that the IBB director can come up with a plan that considers those 10, but not the 8.
We have no authority to delegate non-delegable authorities that have been
I'm
established
just
in legislation.
saying
so.
it out loud, so I'm
Yeah.
going to make sure that we're all in understanding that what's on the table are the potentially for the IBB director considered are the 10, not the other 8. Great, thank you.
Just to follow up with what Governor Meehan said, even though it's stating the obvious, sometimes stating the obvious is important for putting down the rumors and the blogs and the unsigned emails that go back and forth. So I think it would be a very shrewd and smart move on this board's part, perhaps in the last one, to say the non-delegable authority established by Congress shall not be delegated, even though that repeats the obvious. If you put it in here, that lays to rest with some finality. And it certainly doesn't change the law anyway, because the board can't delegate something that Congress says you can't delegate.
Is there any objection? I mean, I think that makes sense, and I can't imagine there's, yes, Paul?
I'm sorry.
I just want to go back. If we could call congressional consultations, the board authorizes congressional consultations in whatever form, but or directs that consultations with Congress. Do you want that to begin with the 3-member team beginning its work? Do you want that to commence in concurring timeframe with the appointment of this subcommittee. So it just ought to be, I think congressional consultation would be a good thing to have in there.
Okay, yes.
If I could suggest language for that, so something like that says the board directs the IBB director to engage in appropriate congressional consultations as soon as practicable to implement this decision.
Well, I don't think it's just the IBB director. I think we all have a part of that. So governors and IBB director and staff.
Well, when we say, typically, Mr. Chairman, when we've wanted anyone in the agency, except the governors, we say the IBB director to do that, but maybe that should be part of the plan?
I mean, that's fine with me. So.
But to be clear, there are 8 people. There are 8 places that we need to go. The 4 authorizing sections and the 4 appropriating sections, and then if there's others who care about this, that's secondary. But for sure, we're going to go touch all 8. That's my goal here. Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Well, and let me follow up. I mean, certainly the 8 that you mentioned, about 4 in the House, 4 in the Senate, go without saying. But there are a couple of senators, Senator Coburn, who doesn't serve on those committees, who has a keen interest and should be ignored at our peril.
Well, I don't think anybody
and
intends to
I think
ignore
we would add Senator Coburn
Why
to.
don't we add this then? Why don't we say that, at the recommendation of various governors? I mean, we will agree to this at the recommendation of various
Well, we're gonna
governors.
see
We'll go
Coburn.
visit Senate. Absolutely, we will see.
We should visit with as many members of Congress who are interested, and even those who might just have a passing interest, and I'm happy to do those meetings with you, Victor.
Okay.
I think
Michael's speaking is the minimum.
Yeah, right. That's right.
That's right.
At a minimum.
Let me just say, first of all, I thought I was going to come to this meeting and be in adamant opposition, and you're moving me to actually supporting it. Surprise, surprise. Because of some of the changes you're making, none of which are all that consequential, but are stating the obvious and frankly gives reassurance to a certain segment that will frankly be in opposition regardless of what you put in. I would suggest, and I guess it would be Amendment 3, and only have one other, that in terms of the IBB director, under the guidance of the Governance Committee, and I assume, Mr. Chairman, Governance is going to be having a lot of meetings, because when you say committee, that means you've got to call me and Susan McHugh and Governor Linton. But that also I would suggest we include there that he will consult with the entity heads and VOA and others, because the CEO obviously is going to be over them. And if we omit that, then it sends a...
we already said that the IBB director is authorized and encouraged to work in close cooperation with broadcasters, including the grantees.
Where? Where?
It's in bullet point.
I may be just missing it.
Yeah, it's here. I just read it. It's on page 3, bullet point 1. I mean, you might have a different version of the document than I do.
I'm reading the one that came in at 11 this morning.
Yeah, it's in Romans 6 on page 2.
Oh, okay.
But the point is,
Can I get a copy of what?
Everyone should have gotten that.
I don't have this that Governor Linton has. Where does it say it should be?
Right there.
Well, the only change I'd make is say authorize and encourage. I'd add the word directed. That way there's not that he wouldn't do it.
Okay.
But I think it's a stronger word.
Authorized and directed.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
So is there a motion for the adoption of these?
And
Yes,
then,
Paul.
Oh, okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I was just trying to suggest a change for to get the non-delegable authorities in at the where we would say. So the intent of this effort is to empower the CEO to the greatest extent under existing law, subject to the board's non-delegable authorities.
No, it wasn't subject. The phrase was going to be very positive. Non-delegable authorities established by Congress will not be changed. That's just
we'll make
flat
it
out clear. No room for doubt. No room for second guessing.
Okay.
We're not. That's the holy grail that we're not touching.
Okay. So is there a motion for the adoption of these
I have one other
recommendations?
proposed change
Okay.
or addition, which I guess would be Amendment 4. I don't know what, I've lost track of the numbers. But I hope someone's keeping track of all this. All right. I would, and I'm sure it'll be done anyway because we discussed this morning, but when the IBB director sends the congressional reprogramming notification, that a copy be simultaneously transmitted to the governors.
That's a good change.
I'd
I'm
add
sure
that
there's
as
there's no objection to that.
Do you have that, Mr. Comer?
Yes.
And a copy be simultaneously transmitted to each governor?
Okay, so is there a motion for approval?
Sorry. Governor Mulhaupt. These have, once again, the language directing the IBB director to have congressional consultations above and beyond the notification, just so we have it clear, please.
Paul?
Okay, I'm going to try my best on this, and I appreciate.
Sorry, if you could just go through the changes, I think. In full.
I mean, there are 4 of them, so
4
we need to go
changes.
through all 4.
Okay, so I'm reading from the draft record of decisions, and first on paragraph 3, at the end, we'll add a sentence that says the non-delegable authorities of the board will not be changed.
Non-delegable authorities of the board as established by Congress,
As set forth in the International Broadcasting
or
Act.
whatever.
Will not be changed. Second, in paragraph Roman 6, the IBB director is directed to work in close cooperation with the BBG-sponsored broadcasters. In paragraph 7, the IBB director, or the board directs the IBB director to prepare and deliver any congressional reprogram notification, a copy of which will be simultaneously transmitted to the board. In paragraph 8, the actual appointment of a CEO will be the subject of a further board decision, and then a further paragraph that's a sentence that says the board directs the IBB director to engage in appropriate congressional consultation as soon as practicable, and at the recommendation of any board members.
Well, I assume you would say the 8 relevant House and Senate committees that deal with BBG and any other members that governors suggest.
I think we said at a minimum the 8 and others as suggested.
Yeah,
That's perfect.
period.
Okay, so with the 8 relevant congressional committees and at a minimum, and such other
Members of the
and
Congress.
such
who-
others as
suggested.
as suggested by the
As
board,
suggested by
any board
governors.
member. As suggested by any board member.
As suggested.
Okay, does that accurately reflect people's?
Mr. Chairman, there was one item missing, which you brought up, at least I think it's missing. If I wrote it down right, the committee, meaning the nominating committee, will not start its work until congressional notification has been sent. That was your suggestion, which I agree with, but I didn't hear Mr. Comer read it back to me. So I want to make sure it's in there.
Okay, so what we would, I wasn't clear if Mr. Chairman, if your intent was still to have that in there.
Yes.
Okay, so at the end of, in that case, at the end of paragraph Roman 4, we would say that the nominating committee will not begin its work until the congressional notification or the reprogramming notification has been sent to the appropriate congressional committees.
That's correct.
Okay, does that
That was the,
hopefully now
that was the
accurately
alternative
reflect?
presiding chairman's very good suggestion.
Okay, so is there a motion to approve these recommendations for the relating to the appointment of a recruitment and appointment of a CEO, or
I will
the
make
role
the
and
motion.
appointment of a CEO? A second? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say.
Wait, Mr. Chairman, I want to speak on the motion as amended. And I came thinking that I would be opposed. And certainly based upon the meeting this morning, I was convinced I would be opposed for a variety of reasons. which I outlined, and maybe since this is on webcam, I should voice at least some of the concerns. But I think the action of this committee in the last 22 minutes has gone a long ways toward, I apologize, I'm going to hang it up, and it's from one of these unavailables, whoever that is. But anyway, my concern has been that this has not been fully, and the reasons I was leaning towards voting no, is that we had not held a public hearing where we sought input from stakeholders and others. There was an effort this summer by BBG staff to get the House to pass it as an amendment, which would have been entirely without public hearings. Of course, the Senate hadn't passed an appropriations or authorization in 8 or 10 years, so I probably didn't have to worry too much that it would pass the Senate based upon past actions. And obviously that failed. What I see now is occurring is a proposal to create a CEO, but with more outreach and more consultation and more public input than what has occurred previously. And to me, that represents a step forward. I'm very comfortable with if you had public input and everyone gets to speak. If my point of view doesn't prevail, well, it just doesn't prevail. But at least I had a fair chance, and I don't mean I, meaning Victor Ashe alone, but people who have interests in this. And my guess is this is going to have more public input because of the discussion we're having right now. It's out in public. It's no longer hidden in the back doors. It's not subject to the non-disclosure. You can't talk about it policy where someone might get hauled in and become a subject of an OIG inquiry. But it lets us perhaps move forward and bring to the public's attention the reasons for it, also reasons against it if they exist, and to move forward in that direction. Also, I think the fact that you're not hiring a CEO until the board, it comes back to the board for approval as to what the process and the procedures will be is a very significant clarification in this, very significant.
I think methodology always includes time for comment, so I think methodology covers that. I think your support, Governor, on this will help if there is a unanimous view to move forward with a methodology and congressional input. I think that will serve as a very positive signal that the entire board intends to move out in a thorough and deliberative way.
And thank you, Madam Secretary. And that is why it leads me to voting yes, reserving the right if the nominating committee comes back with a recommendation that I considered flawed or is not inclusive, to vote against it at that time, assuming I'm still around on the board. I'll be around as a citizen, God willing. But I think the process is a much improved process due to the deliberations that we've had here for the last 30 or 40 minutes. But I still think there's a long ways to go, but I'm willing for it to go forward. And hopefully the nominating committee that Governor Linton appoints will be able to come back with a process in place that produces the best possible man or woman to be the CEO, assuming the relevant congressional committees don't object and let it go forward.
Okay.
So that's where
I think we're moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, the recommendations are agreed to. The board did not take up the issue of grantee administrative streamlining or consolidation today. Policy statements.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's important for our listening audience to know where that stands. There's tremendous interest.
Can we deal with it after the vote on the budget?
He has to go.
Because I have to.
Okay, I don't want to keep you from leading, but as long as we have the right, I think we need to explain for our viewing audience where consolidation stands, or streamline, whatever word you want to lose. I'm willing to have the vote.
It's fine. We've already voted on the budget. Go ahead. Absolutely.
All right, then, as I understand it, because there's keen interest in this, that it's your thought, Mr. Alternative Presiding Chairman, that consolidation should be considered after the November 6th election.
That's my personal view.
Well, your views carry a great deal of weight and are often the subject of a majority vote. My views are more in the minority side. So when you say something, I take it pretty seriously and realize that's how the wind's blowing and that dog will hunt. So I think that's important for people who have an interest in this to know, who have concerns about Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, MBN, to recognize that. I do think it's important that we go over this Deloitte rebuttal to concerns that people had on consolidation. And it may be that a CEO position actually resolves most of the reasons for pushing consolidation. Maybe it doesn't. We'll see. But the CEO may frankly solve that problem, and you avoid World War III with particularly the Asian American community, which is reflected through various nationalities on this. So, for those who are listening who have a real interest in this, nothing's going to happen until November, as I understand it. And it's not assured it'll happen then.
That's correct.
But in November, the governance committee will probably revisit the matter in some way. And so if you want to load up, November's your time to do that.
Okay.
Is that?
Thank you.
Did I misstate it?
Yeah. I'm sorry. Yes, Governor Meehan.
So one of the, as you know, I have a position that we should try to do this all at once instead of just some. And so in conversations with the staff, I understand that we have additional budget authority on the Deloitte side of the equation that we haven't used, that prepared the report on the grantee part, if I've understood this correctly. Would it be possible for us to begin to have them conduct a similar process for the three parts of the agency that they haven't evaluated, the VOA, OCB, and the IBB, to see what additional savings could be had if we managed to do this all at once? I know for many reasons in January the board had pushed this off, but in order to have a more informed vote about moving forward, if this is going to be delayed to November, these things take time. It takes 4, 5, 6 months of this to happen. Wouldn't it be prudent for us to know what cost savings could be had if we managed to pull this all in at once? And since it's a Deloitte out...
The money is there. Has the money been appropriated for anything?
We haven't used it all. In fact, we stopped the process on Deloitte, so there were additional funds there.
There's about over 900,000 still left on that contract. We have not spent the majority, expended the majority of the funds available in that contract.
So I think, to help us understand what the impact of that is, to go through the rest of the agency and come up with a holistic view of an apples and apples comparison, just to know. I mean,
I didn't know we had those resources set aside.
And then we can come back and say, well,
Do we need to take a vote on that?
I don't know. I just.
Do we have consensus, I think, it sounds like? No, so I think we...
It was spending a bunch more money, so I wanted to support.
It's a great idea. It moves everything.
Okay. I just have a couple of other things that need approval.
So what did we decide? I mean, there seems to be a consensus to do what?
Whatever we instructed Deloitte to do when they looked at the three grantees, we would like them to do the same for the OCB, IBB, and VOA, with the remaining funds allocated on their contract, to conduct a similar...
You don't mean to conduct it?
Well, yes, if we were to consolidate all 6 of these companies or entities, there's a report for 3. Let's look at the other 3 and then have an apples-to-apples conversation when that report comes back. Is that too confusing?
So you're basically looking to look at everything.
Right.
They'll be taking the work that they've already done,
right,
and they'd be, with that in mind, looking at the rest of the organization and kind of looking at those reports holistically to see what kind of savings could be achieved by kind of looking at everything. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
What I think you want to do is, what I think I've proposed doing is developing a scope of work, whatever we want to ask them to do. And we should probably meet with either the governance committee to determine what it is you want them to do, and then task Deloitte with doing it with the remainder of the money that we have.
In terms of saving time, we could just give them the same orders we gave for the other three, but if there's some nuances there, great.
Okay.
But generally speaking, if whatever we tasked them to do there, let's exercise the same review process for the other three.
Well, a couple of questions on that. First of all, surely we're not going to spend $900,000 for that. That's what we have left in the Deloitte. How much would you visualize this taking?
Governor, I
cost-wise.
think we would probably sit down with Deloitte and have a discussion with them, because what we're talking about is within the scope of the original contract. And so we would talk to Deloitte and say, and look at a cost estimate for what we're looking at and see how much of the 900. My guess is, because they haven't expended a huge amount of money compared to the total amount of the contract for the work that they've already done, my guess is they're not going to expend the entire 900 on this task, but we would have to sit down and have a discussion with them.
I think that part at least ought to be notified to the governance committee, and we ought to agree on it. I mean, I don't know what you all agree to. I mean, whether it be you think 400,000 can do it, 200,000, 900,000.
I think that.
Well, I know it depends upon the work.
Well, how can we guess right now what it'll
All I'm
cost?
saying is when you come up with what you and Deloitte talk about before you actually authorize them to do it, I think it ought to give the board some knowledge that we're in the 400K range, or you're in the 900K range, or.
Yeah, I agree. I think
And
the
if we
governance committee
disagree with
should
it, we
make
have the
a
right to share that with
Right,
you.
we'll bring it to the governance committee. I think
All
we're
right.
agreed on that.
Secondly, let me just for the record say I'm one of those who frankly was unimpressed and underwhelmed by the Deloitte report. It was a 3-week study, and it came up with sophomoric, in my view, many unsubstantiated savings. I'll say savings, alleged savings. And based upon what they've done to date, I think a more objective and impartial group should be employed. I realize that's a minority point of view, but it doesn't bother me to express a minority point of view. I will point out that the savings that allegedly would occur from consolidation of the 3 entities were, in my view, were not justified. They didn't outline where the actual savings were, how many positions in the 3 entities would disappear, and also the contract is written almost preordained what the result would be. Basically, they said if you came back and say consolidation is important, then and ought to occur, and the board goes along with it, you just got a $1 million contract to come up with the game plan by which you do it. And if you come back and say consolidation is not needed, well, you don't have the $1 million contract because you don't do it. I think it was a badly worded contract, but I mean, I can't undo that. But the Deloitte report, in my view, was sophomoric, was not justified. I can tell you at least 2 of the 3 entities have major reservations about it. You can say that's self-serving on their part. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But I think we ought to hear from them on it. And the whole, and so what they've done to date leaves me most unimpressed. And I wouldn't do business with them.
Okay. I think, whether to hire or not hire Deloitte will be part of the decision that will be brought to the governance committee. Quickly, Paul, please. We've managed to get through one half
Okay, I just want
the agenda
everyone
item.
Well, I don't think we ought to rush. I don't mind staying here till 8 tonight.
Okay. This is just important that everyone understands that we're doing things in accordance with applicable procurement integrity rules. And what you're board, we understand the board is encouraging us to do is to see if the existing scope of work attached to the, is adequate to cover the additional, the additional work that the board thinks should be done. But it's just important that everyone understands that the federal procurement integrity rules are things that are applicable, and that our understanding of your guidance is that everything should be done in accordance with those rules.
And Victor, the governance committee should share your concerns with Deloitte, and I'll do that. I think we'll do that to ensure if we, engage with Deloitte going forward, that hopefully we get a better
Well,
product
as I
by your
say, I
standards.
hope it's more than a 3-week study. A 3-week study of this issue, in my mind, it was laughable if it wasn't so serious. You can't do a serious 3-week study and come up with a valid recommendation.
Well, I don't think it's the time to litigate the Deloitte. There's a countervailing argument, but I don't think we need to go there right now. I'd just like to finish up on the governance committee. We have important issues with regard to equal opportunity and sexual harassment. The committee considered the text of policy statements regarding equal employment opportunity and sexual harassment. The committee recommends unanimously that the plenary board adopt the revised EEO and sexual harassment policy statements, which are set forth in the draft record of decisions. Is there any discussion on this matter?
Yes, well, I asked in the meeting this morning, maybe Mr. Comer has the answer now. He said that this statement reflects the vast majority of the recommendations that were contained in the discussion that we had at the Governance Committee meeting back in March. Have you had time to check the record and see if really all of them were or what was left out? Because we discussed that about 20 minutes this morning earlier.
Yes, Governor, actually, I did go back and check the record and speak with people who were at the meeting and transcribing the discussion, and all of your changes were incorporated. The only thing that was not incorporated, it was the subject of the discussion there, was your suggestion that something about union activity should be included in the equal employment opportunity statement, and that was not included. But other than that, all of your changes were included.
Equal opportunity, okay, well, why don't we go to that? Why don't we do the one we all agree on first? There are actually 2 of them. Mr. Chairman, I would make a motion that we adopt the draft policy statement on sexual harassment, and then the equal employment opportunity issue is a separate.
All right. Okay. Is there a second on adopting the sexual harassment policy? All those.
And let me say, Mr. Chairman, I think under your leadership, the time that the committee spent, as opposed to a rubber stamp pro forma approval, resulted in improvement to an important issue that Congress and I think most Americans would agree is a serious issue. And we now have a better policy than what we had previously. So I'm happy to see us move forward, and I think we can take pride in this.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion's agreed to.
The next one deals with equal opportunity.
Right. Is there discussion on this subject?
Well, my question on unions was to protect people for belonging to a union or engaging in union activities, that they wouldn't be penalized. Why would that not be in here? Why wouldn't we let people, why would we even remotely suggest that being a member of a union could penalize you?
I guess the short answer is that no one is saying that being a member of the union subjects anyone to a penalty. It's just that this equal employment opportunity is governed by a different section of the United States Code, and there's a separate body of law dealing with union activity. So the labor and employment experts who are on our staff and others that we've consulted kind of unanimously agree that it's just a different. It's oranges, and we're talking about apples here. It's not that. So this policy statement is just about equal employment opportunity.
But it does no harm to say that you won't be penalized because you belong to a union. No harm is done. And I can assure you there are some people of AFGE who are concerned about it. They may be wrongly concerned and not be valid, but, if you have a concern, if you put it in here, what damage is done? Other than some lawyers come up with a reason not to do it. No, I'm asking him.
I was going to support your position.
All right, fine.
I think you could easily add. You could easily add in here. Nothing in here shall be deemed to conflict with the protections afforded to individuals and unions under the National Labor Relations Act.
Well, Mr. Chairman, for purposes of getting this before you, I would move the board make a motion that we adopt the equal opportunity statement. Hopefully there'll be a generous second, and then I would move it be amended. But first of all, we have to have a motion to adopt it.
Okay.
Now I would move to take Mr. Corn's. you know, the news out of today's meeting may be the Corn-Ash Alliance, which will shock the hell out of everybody.
Middle East, too.
Well, if we, but I would add that we add a sentence that membership in a, if I'm phrasing this right, Steve, in a union
One should not be penalized.
would not result in any penalty.
Yes, Paul?
And I make that as a motion.
Okay.
Quite frankly, I don't know if it's okay, and I don't feel that it makes sense for this board or even myself to suggest that any change to this policy to talk about unions or union activity. I would suggest that rather than adopting that as part of that the board, my recommendation is for the board to adopt this policy as it is, and maybe for the governance committee to take up that issue separately, and if necessary, and with the input from experts in the field, and if it makes sense under those circumstances, to propose an amendment to this policy. Because quite frankly, I just don't know the implications of what you're saying, so it's hard for me to know if it's okay or not okay or would make sense.
So what you're saying is
We haven't adopted it, but in committee we adopted it, and staff for whatever reason didn't include it.
Not the amendment.
And what I'm saying is, if this is put in,
I mean, is there an objection, Governor Ashe, to referring this matter, the amendment, to the governance committee for further review? Do you object to that?
well, when will governance consider it? I mean,
At
will
its
it
next
be
meeting, I hope,
in
will be in
Will we have
October.
enough-
I hope so. That would be my intention.
I'm trying to figure out what's wrong with this.
Well, I think what he's saying is that he doesn't, I mean, there may be unintended consequences, there may be implications here. I think no one wants to penalize anybody for union activity. So the question is, how is the appropriate way to reflect that in our policies? So I would suggest that this come to the governance committee, and we will consider either creating a new policy or revising this policy in that respect after it's been looked at by advisors and experts.
Well, let me ask you this, if we do that. Mr. Comer, you have a busy workload coming up. Are you able to get back with a thoughtful answer in the next 30 days, or are you going to need 2 months? In other words, I'm
No problem, Governor.
all right.
No problem.
And so you're not necessarily opposed to this, you just want further research.
I'm not opposed to the concept. I just think that it's prudent for us to bring this up as a separate matter, adopt this policy, and then bring that up as a separate matter if it makes sense to make those revisions at that
Well,
time.
what I don't understand is, and I hope in the future, as I said this morning, I was the main person who talked about all this, and no one ever came back to me and shared with me that the attorneys had a problem on the union issue until right now. We could have saved ourselves about an hour of discussion had several weeks ago who called. But that's water over the dam. I can't undo it. What I am saying is, and this isn't you, this is attorneys who deal with labor law, come up with some reason as to why this statement shouldn't occur. Will they be here to give us their views, or how are we going to be able to explore their reasons? I mean, obviously, they've taken an initial stand against it because we agreed to it at the governance committee in March, and due to these unknown attorneys, it's now out. So now we're suggesting to put it back in, and now we need more time to go back to these people.
Governor Ashe, I'm sorry, but Betsy Parrish, who's the head of our labor and employment practice, was at the March meeting. She voiced an objection to that, and to short answer your question is yes, we will have labor and employment attorneys at the next governance committee in force to answer all questions, and we'll prepare any briefing materials that may be helpful to the committee.
Let me tell you this, and I'm agreeable to doing what Governor Mulhaupt has suggested. But you'll save yourself a lot of time if Ms. Parrish or whoever it is on your staff deals with this. If they'll pick up the phone and call me in Knoxville, Tennessee, and go over this, doesn't mean to say we agree or disagree, but we can save ourselves. But they may persuade me. And if they do, then I don't have to spend 30 minutes at this meeting or in governance on this issue. And my colleagues would probably be very grateful for that. So is there any hope that whatever they come up with, they say, yes, Governor Ashe, we think you're right, wonderful idea. Or Governor Ashe, you really don't understand fully the other ramifications, and here's why. Can I get your assurance that Ms. Perry, or whoever it is on your staff deals with this, will call and chat with me about this?
Yes.
On that basis, Mr. Chairman, I would suggest the amendment that I offered be referred to the Governance Committee and and I hope the minutes will reflect this, be considered at our October, I guess, 11 meeting.
Okay. Equal opportunity policy be approved. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Right.
The motion's approved. The policy's approved. Okay. So finally, with the last item for the Governance Committee, the committee discussed the resolution adopted unanimously by the board, and now subsequently Governor Ashe has changed his vote at the June 2012 meeting to establish a policy regarding non-disclosure of deliberative information by governors. Although individual governors have different views about aspects of the policy and its operation, the committee adopted no further recommendations with respect to the policy at this time. The committee will continue to monitor and discuss the implementation of the non-disclosure policy adopted by the board in June.
Mr. Chairman, in discussions with other governors, it was my understanding that there was not an intent to include legislation. That's what Governor Meehan told me, and that I would suggest we take that. If I'm misstated,
I can clarify my position. I had thought that it was that it only pertained to budgetary matters.
Well, that's not the way the policy reads. Because legislation is included, as I understand it, in OMB guidelines. Legislation has to be approved by the President, by the White House, by OMB, and it's therefore pre-decisional. Now, unless the board has announced it publicly or has released it somehow, but we do have OMB issues here, I believe. So,
well, that's, we had a long discussion in our closed governance meeting this morning, which as to whether or not, and Governor Meehan talked about meeting with Senator Kerry as an example, or I'm meeting with Senator Corker or whoever, and can we discuss legislation? And I think the general consensus was that we ought to be able to. Now, I think it ought to be modified to say, consistent with OMB regulations, legislation can be discussed by members of the board.
I agree. I mean, I think governors should be able, any governor at any time should be able to discuss our legislative goals with members of Congress. My hope would be it would be in consultation with the other governors.
The only thing I would say to that is that we're part of the executive branch, and our goals have to be approved by the President, by the White House, through OMB, before they're advanced to discussion at Congress.
There's no OMB issue there.
Then I would make that as a motion that we modify the non-disclosure.
We don't have the policy in front of us, at least I don't.
Well, it doesn't keep us from adopting a motion that says subject to White House and OMB.
Can we bring this? I mean, I think we understand where we're trying to be here, which is as transparent as we can be about our goals and our strategic initiatives. Can we refine that in governance? Would that be acceptable?
Yes, but are we going to have several hours at governance?
Well, we're going to do our best. I mean,
This will be a hard one.
no, I don't
think so either, but, this is why we've gotten ourselves, this is the law of unintended consequences, where, I feel, while I don't agree with it, I'll try to honor it, but I don't want to get myself in a situation where I've discussed some legislation and somebody says, well, you just
Well, I mean, I think we're trying to be
OMB.
reasonable here. I mean, we're trying to balance things here between a legitimate, various legitimate interests. That's what we're trying to do. So, and we'll continue to work on that and to get it right.
Well, so I have your assurance that it'll come up at the next governance meeting in terms of legislation. I also think, as we discussed, but I won't go on this forever, is that we need to review more carefully the consequences if it is felt that some member of the board violated this policy. What's the penalty? What's the process by which he or she is held to account, or is it just ignored? We have
Precedent for that? I don't know the answer.
Well,
Well, we discussed it. I mean, we did, again, I think it's a question of reasonable people.
Well, do you have a
determining
hearing?
what the nature of a supposed violation is and determining what to do about it. I mean, there's purely technical things. There are things that could be quite egregious. And I don't know that we can answer every theoretical question.
Well, I think the big ones you can answer, if someone knowingly goes out and shares it with a blog, does that, and said, I'm openly violating this, what are you going to do about it?
I think it depends on how important it is and what the board decides to do. I mean,
Well, in that case, you probably have enacted something that's totally unconstitutional due to vagueness. I mean, we have no answer to what I just asked. And I don't mean that personally at all.
I
But-
think it's clear we got to kick this back to.
yeah, that's what I'm
governors.
saying. We're going to take it. I mean, we said all along when we adopted this policy that this would be continuously refined in the governance committee. So,
Well, and I
that's
would
where we
also
are.
make the argument when we're discussing non-disclosure, we might consider doing it in public.
So, okay, that.
I know that
luckily
didn't get a yes, but that's
concludes
my plea.
thankfully concludes the governance committee report. Strategy and budget committee report, Governor Meehan.
Thank you. The Strategy and Budget Committee met twice in the month of August on the 1st and the 28th, and we worked to refine our 2014 budget submission. We had Governor Ashe and I attended with all of the appropriate staffers and presidents of the various committees. Due to OMB restrictions, we're not allowed to discuss this in an open setting, but we had a robust conversation about the needs to apply the budget and strategy that the board has passed to the actual budgeting process, and we've had very robust conversations with each of them. The committee also agreed to meet on a monthly basis to continue to refine some of these and solve some of the inherent conflicts in executing and implementing the strategy as it relates to the budget process on a regular basis. We also looked at crisis contingency planning for the Middle East and Syria, Africa, and Mali. And we were briefed on mobile web distribution opportunities and the status of BBG programs with respect to Iran and to Burma. We look forward to working closely with the programmers on the implementation of the strategies. This concludes my report. Thank you.
Oh, and Mr. Chairman, it's a great report, but there is one item we discussed which has been in the news that I think we should mention here, and we did take action on it, and that's the issue involving Gallup. As you know, a whistleblower lawsuit was brought against Gallup alleging fraud. The Department of Justice, for whatever reason, decided to join that lawsuit over billings that they allege were fraudulent. And since we have up to a $50 million contract with Gallup over a 5-year period, I thought it was important that we find out, are our billings being appropriately handled or misappropriately handled. Staff, as I understand it, Mr. Comer's legals on his staff talked to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and if I'm misstating it, feel free to jump in. And they did say that they thought an audit by us of the Gallup contract and billings would be appropriate as opposed to a decision to simply not use them anymore or whatever. My question is this, and Mary Jean Bueller maybe is the one to answer, is where, and this was discussed, I think, August 18, 17, I forget which.
The board meeting or the committee?
Strategy and budget.
28th.
28th. That the auditor to do this hasn't yet been engaged. And I think there's a certain urgency that this audit happen soon so we can put the matter to rest. But anytime a well-known, internationally known firm such as Gallup, you have the Department of Justice join a whistleblower lawsuit, it does raise red flags, and due diligence and fiduciary responsibility would dictate to us, not that we're holding them guilty, because they're innocent until shown otherwise, but to look into the matter. And I'm concerned that the audit, how quickly is this going to happen? And I assume, Mary Jean, you're the person to tell us.
I'm going to defer to our legal counsel on this.
Okay. Paul?
With all due respect to the concerns, which I understand, this matters.
Can you speak?
Yes,
where we
this
can
matter
hear?
is currently under investigation and litigation by the Justice Department. And we really should not be engaging in this conversation in the open meeting, mostly because it would be purely speculative about what would happen, but also because it may be interpreted as, it may not be welcomed by the Department of Justice. So I would, I think that we should just defer. I would recommend strongly to the board that this conversation just be deferred to a later date, and we're happy to brief.
That's very different from what we were told in committee, we were told by your office that U.S. Attorney's Office has suggested we do an audit. How does that compromise anything? We do audits on ourselves all the time.
So understanding the pending legal matter that doesn't involve the BBG as far as we know, but it is prudent for those of us that were on the committee to be concerned that the money that we do spend with this contract is being spent well. And I thought we had come to an understanding that we could at least audit the contract as it's only about 5-6 months old that we've had with Gallup. It's just been in this calendar year. And I think that, if I recall correctly from the meeting, that Governor Ashe asked for to be sure that our contract was being executed properly. And why shouldn't we be able to talk about that?
I think probably Paul's comment about...
Can you speak louder? I can't hear you.
I think perhaps, Governor, we can give you a discussion or a briefing offline on this. We have had some discussions with the Inspector General.
We have what?
We have had some discussions, and I believe the legal office has had some discussions with the Inspector General, but I think this is something that, because of the litigation and the situation with that we discuss offline.
So you're saying if a congressional committee had a hearing on this, we'd decline to testify because of litigation? I don't think you'd do that.
Well, it's not. We're not saying. First of all, it is in a congressional committee, but what we're strongly recommending is that we don't engage in further discussions about this matter in an open meeting because it's a subject of a current Department of Justice litigation and investigation, and the contract that we have with Gallup is not subject to any such. Is not the subject of that, but it may be viewed as prejudicial and unwelcome by the Justice Department for us to engage in this conversation in an open meeting. And so I'm strongly recommending to the board that if it's interested in this, that we could arrange some kind of some briefing outside of the open meeting on this topic.
Why didn't you tell us that at our August 28 meeting?
My understanding was that the August 28th meeting was in a committee. I wasn't there it was in a committee meeting which wasn't open was not part of the open meeting, and we can be prepared to provide any level of information.
Why can't you discuss the public documents that are filed in the court that any citizen can go see?
Well, primarily because I'm not familiar with them, but I haven't read them. But even if but what I'm strongly suggesting and recommending to the board is that we defer this conversation until we can brief the governors in a setting that's not.
And once we have the briefing, are we embargoed from discussing it, or what?
I think we should have the briefing, and we should proceed after that.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, this relates to potential fraud. I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but I mean, a serious lawsuit has been filed. Red flags have gone up all over town, and we have an obligation to make sure the tax dollars are being appropriately spent. I'm not saying this particular Gallup contract with BBG is or isn't. But clearly we know there's a question about the one with the State Department because the Department of Justice, for whatever reason, has decided to join it. And they're now in litigation. I'm not saying they're right or they're wrong. But it sends up signals that if a company is being accused by DOJ of misconduct in one area, we who are doing business with the same firm should seek to reassure ourselves that at least the contract with BBG is above board, being appropriately handled, and we have no reason to change it.
And I think we all agree with that.
And what are we doing? And we should do that in public. And let our constituents.
Has Justice given you any direction on this vis-a-vis BBG?
Vis-a-vis our contract with Gallup? No.
Well, so we don't know that Justice objects to our discussion or not. someone has just said, well, they might, so therefore let's be quiet.
I think that we have intention to undertake due diligence to ensure that we are spending the money appropriately. We will, and what I think I hear is that staff will brief on the way, the methodology that will happen and when it will happen and all of that. But I don't know that we could, further conversation, other than agreeing that it's an important issue, is advancing the ball right here, right now.
All right, I want to know, if we do this, when is this briefing going to occur? In the next 10 days? And will there be somebody from Justice? I mean, I want to hear Justice tell me, Governor Ashe, be quiet. Don't discuss this in a public meeting. That would certainly have me look at things differently than someone outside Justice in abundance of caution telling me not to do it.
Just so to be clear, the BBG is not part of the pending.
No, this is a matter of due diligence.
I thought you said.
And
so
we all agree we're going to do it.
I recommend that at the next strategy and budget meeting, we have a full briefing about our self-auditing of the expenditure of this contract.
That's fine. And just to be clear, I mean, we're not
Can
part
you
of
speak into the mic?
Yes, we're not part of the Department of Justice litigation, and we have, as any agency does, an ongoing oversight responsibility with respect to our procurement activities.
Then we would like a briefing on that. I think that's
that
what Governor Ashe
we
said.
agree.
We have no problem providing such a briefing. It's just that this is not an appropriate forum, in my opinion.
Okay.
To do that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, this is a huge contract, and I don't know that anything's wrong with it, but I think, given what's happened, we should have public reassurance.
Well, I think
that
we
everything, and that we do, under Governor Meehan's leadership, I have great confidence that strategy and budget will do this properly. But all I'm asking, Mr. Comer, is that at this meeting, unless they decline, that you get someone from Justice or the U.S. Attorney's Office. Someone had to have talked to the U.S. Attorney's Office, because if they in fact said BBG should do an audit, no, they didn't make that up. They didn't fabricate it. And so whoever said it maybe ought to come to strategy and budget and tell us why. And then we need to know, because what I've heard is, Mary Jean, is that we're having trouble getting the auditor in a timeline. And I don't want us to, if we have to do an audit, that it's done 5 months from now. And I would suggest in the meantime that we look carefully at the business. We're not required to do one study after another with Gallup, that we need to look carefully to make sure whatever funds we do spend are spent appropriately.
I think I completely agree with you. I'm not sure where the information that you said, I'm not sure where you got the information about the issues with an auditor. I don't know where that came from, but I agree that, we do need to make sure that we are spending our funds appropriately.
I think we're all agreed.
But when can we get an answer as to when the audit will be done? If the U.S. Attorney Office said it, I don't think there's any disagreement that we're going to do the audit. I want to know when we're going to do an audit. Will it be before Thanksgiving? Will it be next Valentine's Day? When?
May we get back to you?
What?
May we get back to you on that while we finish some of the due diligence?
You want to get back to me?
Yes, sir.
In my lifetime?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. I mean, I think by the next strategy meeting is when you ought to get back.
I think that's appropriate.
Okay.
Good.
All right.
I think the fact we've had the discussion, even though it may have been one-sided, is helpful, because I think our people who follow us need to know we're onto this. Not that we've taken sides, but that we want to follow the facts. And, as they say in a divorce suit, follow the money.
I thought it was only the lawyers are happy.
Well, they're the ones who make money.
We're about ready to lose our quorum. The undersecretary has to leave, and I believe another governor probably has to leave soon,
Well, should we
too.
just make a motion to move this to the next meeting?
I would suggest, if there's no objection, that at least the honorary resolutions for Susan Andros and John Lindbergh be agreed to. If we could just agree to that by consent.
Well, let me just say, Mr. Chairman, first of all, I'm willing to make a motion. I hope in the future, whoever plans these, whoever decided to do an hour and 15 minutes for this meeting clearly had no understanding of what was on the agenda. I mean, it was guaranteed for failure, and we shouldn't ever let this happen again. And hopefully in October 11, we'll put 2 or 2.5 hours. I mean, RFE had an hour and 45 minutes set aside. Not that it wasn't important, it was. But for us, with 17 items, This is bad planning.
Well,
And
I mean-
hopefully we don't do it again. But I now move that we
In
adopt the
fairness,
resolution
I mean,
for Susan Andrews and John
We're trying to
Lindbergh.
squeeze a lot of things into a day, because that's what time the governors
Well, we
have.
need to go back to 2 days,
Well, I mean, that's something we should discuss, and, you know,
because we can't do our job in an hour and 15 minutes, then we all leave mad at each other because someone had to leave early or someone insists upon further discussion.
understood.
Well, and I just want to make a comment. I very much want the board to see and hear a presentation on our progress on innovation and digital
Right.
outreach, but we'll do that on in the next.
I hope
meeting.
you set aside 2 or 3 hours, and then we don't have to worry.
I-
Well, who sets the schedule? It's
I
not
think
me.
It's the staff working with the presiding governor, doing the best they can with all of the various things that have to be accommodated during the day. And people are doing their best, and I just think that we have to try to continue to work on it. But to impugn people for trying to fit everything in, I just don't think it's appropriate.
I'm not impugning anyone. I'm just saying we need to do better.
Well, we're
I
doing
renew
our
my
best.
motion to honor Susan Andrews and John Lindbergh.
All right, is there a second? Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Those are agreed to.
I move that we move the agenda to October 11 and adjourn the remaining agenda.
Okay. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, thank you.